difficult for me to discuss about innovation or discuss about technology production without looking at how societies they are reacting to the global policies, governments, and the private sector, the universities, they are developing. I'm saying that because there are lots of ways of looking at a specific country, and I prefer looking at Brazil that way. I mean, there is growth in Brazil, although it's not Chinese level growth. There is a strong reduction of poverty and a strong reduction of inequality. And that's in an ambience, in an environment, in a democratic environment, which I guess for Latin American countries is quite important. You know? What I mean is there is in Brazil a different quality of economic growth, basically much different from the past. Just to remind you, I don't know if you know, but from 1940 to 1980, I mean, during 40 years, Brazil showed a kind of Chinese pace of growth. Brazil grew then at a rate of 7% a year during 40 years, around 40 years. And we succeeded in industrialize our country, but at the same time, we created one of the most unequal country in the world. Since 2001, I mean, almost for 13 years in sequence, you know, Brazil has dropped inequality. That graph is just related to Gini index, you know. That means that it shows how income inequality is performing. But again, you know, we reached the lowest level of inequality in our history. That means that Brazil has raised around 40 million people out of poverty line since 2003. Every professor, in general, teach that it's better to have a very strong economy before we think about any reduction in poverty or inequality. And Brazil is doing precisely the opposite. And as I told you, it's controversial. I mean, there is growth, job creation, social policies, together with the minimum wage in a low inflation environment. The result was, in 2012, Brazil reached the lowest level of unemployment in its history, 5.2% of the workforce. And there is a very successful income distribution and social inclusion. And that's, for me, is quite important. And if there is any debate, we can debate the follow idea, for example. What is good for any countries? To grow 6, 7, or 8% a year, or to grow a little bit less, but reducing with reduction of poverty and inequality. That's a very strong dilemma, you know? And there is no easy answer to that dilemma. But I think that if we are asked, if we are told to answer which is the main agenda that Brazil has, I'm going to point out that point. The Brazilian productivity needs to climb up. We need to raise our productivity in order to have a very strong and dynamic economy. For me, for myself, there is no other agenda in Brazil. That's the main point. In 2004, it was announced the first industrial, technological, and foreign trade policy. And then Brazil tried to define different plans in order to foster growth, innovation, and technology. To encourage high-tech risk projects, we offer loans of about 2.5% a year of interest rates. The Brazilian inflation is about 6% a year. That means that the loans we are offering in my agency or in the National Development Bank to generate technology, to generate innovation, is a negative loan at around 4% a year. They are exceptional in terms of incentives to companies to innovate and to produce new technologies.
I think we'll see this moment almost as important as the Industrial Revolution. It's not a reversal of it, but it is a reversal of the power balance that shifted as a result of the Industrial Revolution. In 1820, by far the world's largest economy was China. It actually was passed by the United States around 1888, according to a wonderful study by Angus Maddison. If you're interested in this, Google Angus Maddison, OECD, and you can look back through a century, a millennium of world economic history, looking at the way in which the balance of economic size shifted between different countries in the world. I think that, of course, there is the G20 now as the main effective operating governance of the world economy. Asia is supplying something like 2/3 of world savings, and over the past 10 years has supplied something like 2/3 of cumulative growth. And you may have read in the papers stories about how growth is now switching towards the developed world. And I think in some measure it is. If the developed world is lucky, it will get perhaps 2% growth next year, held back by the Eurozone, which will be lucky to do half of 1. The emerging world may dip from 5, 6 to 4, 6 to 5.5. But this, even if there is a narrowing of the gap, I have not seen a single projection that suggests that the lines will cross over. So this goes on and on and on. So where does it lead? So already the BRICS, within the next 10 to 15 years, come to dominate the world economy. They don't have as high per capita GDP, as Professor Arbix pointed out, but they will come to dominate. I think that this is not only an inevitable shift of power, but a welcome one. I think it's one from which we can learn, and as I think I'm going to try and demonstrate in a moment, benefit. I found myself sitting next to Ralph Spid, who is the German ex-BMW chap who was hired by Jaguar Land Rover, by Tata of India, to run Jaguar Land Rover. He told me how, when he was a child in Germany, Jaguar were winning at Le Mans. They were pioneering the use of disc brakes on cars. They had that beautiful double overhead camshaft engine. It was actually better than anything, the single overhead cams that BMW was doing. BMW was flat on its back. And he said, that was my experience as a child. And now, Jaguar Land Rover sells, together, sells 1/10 of the cars of BMW. What I want to do is try and reverse it. And under new management, Jaguar Land Rover sales are up 26% this year. They're employing more people. They are hugely profitable. The half-year profits just out last week were $1 billion. They're investing in a $500 million plant in Brazil. Just this week. They're opening the largest showroom in Tamil Nadu is being opened, again, just this week. So you have here new management, Indian management, succeeding where Ford and slightly separately BMW had both failed. Why? What is it? And I don't know the answers to this, except you might say their timing was good, they were lucky, a lot of the heavy lifting had been done. But I think it has something to do with the deeper, long-term values of Tata of India, that actually there's an ethical dimension owned by a trust. There's breadth, not the pursuit of short-term profit, a ballsiness prepared to take on huge risks. But I think in this particular instance, Indian ownership has succeeded where the joint stock companies of the West have failed. And I think that has a message that we should not assume that our forms of corporate ownership and management are the best in the world. The London Evening Standard was losing something of the order of 15 million a year when the Lebedevs took it over. This was billed as sort of Russian oligarchs. I don't know what that word means. How do you like, said a Labour peer to me, clapped me on the back. What's it like, Hamish, she said to me, working for a Russian spy, Gee, thanks. They've been great. They have turned the Standard into a modest profit in 2 years from losing 15 million a year, whereas the hugely competent, love them or loathe them, Daily Mail group had failed. Couldn't do it. Still losing 15 million a year in desperation. They have done three things really well. First of all, they've been very innovative. Taking the Standard free was just a stroke of genius. We're actually up to printing 600,000 copies a day, with probably going out to 800,000. Indeed, if you add together the Standard increase in circulation and the I and the Indie, we're actually printing double as many copies as we were 4 years ago. So, very innovative. Secondly, there has been very careful scrutiny of costs, more careful, actually, than our previous owners, any of our previous owners. And finally, we've had utter editorial freedom. We, on the Indie, we were told the proprietor wanted us to do something, interview a Russian. Oh gosh, we said, well, yes, who is it? They said, well, it's Mikhail Gorbachev. Well, actually, yes, we quite like to interview him. It'd be a very good access to that. So, terrific. Now, I tell you these two stories of two BRIC investors here, in this country, that have both been triumphs. This is not us trying to flog more stuff to Bangalore. This is us actually learning from BRIC investment.
For NESTA, those that don't know, NESTA is the UK's innovation foundation. It was set up in 98 with a chunk of money from the National Lottery and has a mission to promote innovation, but is a sort of independent charity. In doing this work, we were building actually on an earlier study that I and another former independent journalist, an FT journalist, Charlie Leadbeater, had done back in 2006-07, where we did a series of studies looking at the state of science and innovation in China, India, Korea, and indeed in Brazil. Here in the UK, we have a lot of talk, of course, from our leaders about the global race, where the UK fits in all of that. And then we had this particular moment of opportunity with the first trip to China by UK ministers for almost 18 months after a rather difficult period in which David Cameron's decision to meet with the Dalai Lama informally in May 2012 led to a total freeze in diplomatic relations, which I think surprised everyone on the British side, at least in its duration. So we've come out of that, and I think, as most of you will be aware, the Prime Minister himself is about to go off to China in the next few days. So there's a sort of rapid cycling of high-level British diplomacy to recover ground that's perceived as having been lost during this period. And innovation, science, research links are part of that. Others, again, emphasise that despite all of this ambition and investment, there are still fundamental problems in the Chinese system. Will Hutton is one prominent voice associated with this view. He did a book on China a few years ago, and his basic argument is that the fundamental institutions of democracy, the judiciary, independent press, intellectual property are fundamental to real progress in innovation. China is still lacking several of these according to the Hutton type account, and this will ultimately will lead to China's failure in developing a fully innovative economy. Linked to that, there are those that see China's strategy in this area as representative of a quite sophisticated protectionist, techno-nationalist strategy to first draw from and incorporate advances from elsewhere and then sort of squeeze others out and cement their advantage. So that's the kind of hawkish account from Washington. Others, again, in the environmental movement particularly emphasize what China's doing in clean tech and renewables, and there's a whole narrative about China and low carbon, obviously set against the increase in coal-fired power and everything else as well. In our report, we say, well, all of those are true, and of course China's a big, complicated place. It's not that any one story is going to tell you anything completely. All of those are true. We talk instead about China as an absorptive state, and we took the literature and innovation studies, and I work in a big science and innovation policy research unit, and there's a lot of scholarship on absorptive capacity in innovation. So we took that idea and sort of played with it in the Chinese context and really have made an argument here about China as an absorptive state, which is a sort of spin on the fast follower argument. There are aspects of China learning, drawing in knowledge, skills, technology, people from elsewhere, but also, very importantly then, layering their own creativity and novelty on top of that. And we use in the beginning of the report this example, which is an enormous computer, Tianhe 2, that was switched on in the summer of this year and is now the world's fastest supercomputer. And it's a great example of absorptive technology advance. Inside it are lots and lots of Intel chips, so it's obviously not Chinese homegrown technology, but the way it's been put together has been done in China, and it's obviously being used to advance high-tech Chinese computing. And it's very likely that the next generation of this supercomputing race, particularly when we move to exascale computing in a few years, will be purely based on homegrown Chinese technology. We're particularly interested in what's happening in the Chinese policy context, and when we did the earlier demos study that I mentioned in 2006-07, that was published and based on research at the time when China had just published its last medium to long-term plan for science and technology in 2006, and that runs all the way up to 2020, and had within it the general direction of travel that's still being followed. But we're now midway through that plan, and there's a big focus within China's own policy conversation about how well, how badly the system is performing relative to that plan, whether they've seen the kind of return on investment they would have expected given the amount of money they're putting in, and what more can be done to increase quality, efficiency, and improve evaluation through the system, and also crack down on bits of corruption in the research system. I mean, there's problems of corruption in research, as in many areas. And there were bits of this in some of the discussions in the third plenum the other day. We wait to see how much further this reform agenda will be pushed under the new leadership. Our recommendations, which again are set out in more detail, were in essence these four: that the UK should develop a new 5-year strategy for collaboration with China, not only in the area of academic research, but right through the innovation value chain, where we don't have such sophisticated approaches, and other countries, Germany, the US perhaps do. We suggested a time frame for that, which would be 2016, to have it in place to coincide with new policies in China's 13 5-year plan, which will be out at the start of 2016, and also the post-2015 spending review, whoever's in power at that point here, which should have been completed by the autumn of 2015. There's a lot that can be done to improve the metrics for understanding how we get collaboration working. We said there need to be new additional institutional arrangements. An expert group is one way to supplement the formal dialogue that takes place between ministers. And there's more that can be done to boost the UK's sort of presence on the ground. So there's also some practical stuff, and David Willits, I know, and I'm sure through the PM's visit in the next few days, there's going to be quite a strong push to build on those moments, because they are theatre more than anything, to actually get concrete progress in terms of how we do all of this with China. So those are the main conclusions. Sorry, that's a very rushed account, but the report is free and open access online, and we very much value any comments and thoughts. Thank you.
I work for GE, and we're talking about innovation in the BRIC countries, but I'll specifically be talking about innovations for GE Healthcare.
So Health Imagination is an initiative from GE Healthcare that started about 3 years ago. And it's really based on 3 pillars. The first is affordability, and it's to lower the cost of healthcare through procedures, practices, and technologies. The second is to improve the quality by simplifying and driving the best standards of care. And lastly, to increase access. So by reducing the cost or increasing the affordability and improving the quality, overall you can increase the access of healthcare around the world through low-cost innovation, education, and financing.
A lot of the big multinational companies would take the technology that they already have and maybe simplify it slightly and give it to the emerging markets and say, what do you think about these? But what GE was trying to do was really go through a reverse innovation to look at the problems that these countries face, look at what these countries needed, and develop solutions for those problems. The next Health Imagination product I thought I'd talk about is the V-Scan. The V-Scan is a completely miniaturized ultrasound system. It is the size of an iPhone, slightly bigger than the size of an iPhone. It's a portable ultrasound system which is now making ultrasound available to a number of people who would never have seen an ultrasound before. It's battery powered, and it can be recharged using solar power. And this is one of the technologies that I thought was really interesting because it was miniaturized, and it's really been taken up by the BRIC countries. And so women who are pregnant are getting scans with the ultrasound. And you can imagine a number of the countries where the patient population is so low, they don't get access to healthcare. Less than 10% of people, or less than 10% of pregnant women have any medical attention during their pregnancy. But with the V-Scan, a clinician can get out to the communities, they can scan, and then they can get an indication of if that patient is at a higher risk of complication and request or suggest that that patient go and get more care. And I think that's just a phenomenal use of technology. So it's being used by the BRIC countries, but it's also being used by London's air ambulance. And in the ambulance, the HEMS doctors are able to use the V-Scan to determine if there's any internal bleeding. And if there's internal bleeding, that can be an indication that that patient has to go into surgery right away when they get to the hospital. So it triages the patient more quickly. So technology for the developing market, but lots of use for the developed market as well.
How much about innovation can we talk about in economic terms when the economy of a country is not diversified? And how much can we expect as returns when we have problems of education, and this is considered to be the main driver behind innovation? Because you mentioned IT, and for example, how much Brazil can compete with Silicon Valley if it does not focus on improving the IT education of the country?
It's quite difficult to compete or to elevate our level, the level of standard of living of our population with a very low level of education, with bad education. That's why I think that Brazil must invest a lot in education. The government is doing that. We can complain that it's doing less than we need. But there is no way of competing, not even in IT, in health, in oil and gas, and renewables, everything you want without education. Because innovation is about transformation. Transformation is about people qualified people. That's the basics of the innovation system. The point is just we don't have time, to stop and have better education, then to try to think of innovation. We need to do two things simultaneously. That's the point. That's the challenge, at least.
There's a perception, I would say, that Russia is a difficult place to do business or to collaborate with. Would you like to comment on that?
On Russia, the answer is yes. We've had our principal owner, in Russia, Alexander Lebedev, stuck in jail or then, arrested because of hooliganism, where he nearly punched someone in the face on television, which in many societies would sort of, make you a hero. It's very difficult, but many places are difficult to do business in. I think the argument in Russia is you know it will be difficult. What I have found in my worm's eye view is actually one of the most difficult places to do business is the United States, because you will be cheated, and then you'll suddenly find the company goes bust. Put into liquidation, and you're down money. And if you look at the number of British businesses that have come to grief in the United States, it's just as large as those that have come to grief for different reasons in Russia.
What's your view on the role of social enterprise in economies?
A word on social enterprise in China. We discussed this a little bit in the NESTA report, and NESTA generally does a lot of work on social innovation and social enterprise here in the UK. I think in short summary, these debates are accelerating in China. There was a phrase in the big innovation policy document that came out from the outgoing leadership in the middle of last year, which talked about improving innovation in key social fields, and this was seen, by the people who read and interpret these things as a sort of increase in the level of government support for social enterprise and social innovation of varying kinds. The phrase is still not used widely in the way that it is in other more developed sort of innovation systems, but there's definitely pockets of exciting stuff going on in terms of microcredit and time banks and all the kinds of models of social enterprise that we've seen elsewhere. And there are a few organisations and institutions that have been set up to try and promote and foster it. What hasn't yet happened at a policy level is a debate about innovation in the round being properly connected to the distinctive contribution that social enterprises can make to that. And that's partly because these are things that are sort of managed by different bits of the Chinese government, so it's a bit siloed. There's also, of course, a very controlling approach that the Chinese government takes to the management of civil society more generally, although that itself is fragmenting and breaking down through a whole host of different social pressures.
I think a lot of people based here in Britain could end up being involved in a project, for example, financed by FINEP. So it's a step towards that opportunity, just knowing about it.
I think what was best about tonight is that there was a range of experience in the speakers, and there were people with lots of experience in working in the developing markets.
Well, I currently run my own business, so for me it's just added value, kind of insight, and be able to get in front of people like this to ask them questions, to kind of dig deeper and get a bit more insight. So yeah, for me it's great exposure.
I thought it was really good, really interesting, really informative, and I thought all the speakers were really good. It was a really good mix of speakers. They were all very succinct and they all had different points to make, which was all very interesting.
Oh, I think tonight was terrific. I think that the floor show was fine and I learnt a lot. But what's been really interesting is the conversation taking place afterwards. You've had people from all over the world explaining their different experiences, and I can't believe that there won't be some kind of business relationship or friendship or something that won't come out of that.